We're going to talk today about the role of retail in facilitating and enabling a transition to an agroecological food system. And we've got 4 really fantastic businesses who have been working in this field for for different lengths of time, which I think is really fascinating. And I think the inspiration for this session was the idea that, and it's very noticeable, and I'm sure you will all have noticed it, that there is a huge surge in interest from the farming community in regenerative agriculture and agroecological practice. And it's really easy, actually, to scale up land area that is being committed to these better, more resilient, sustainable methods of production. But the real challenge is, what are the routes to market for those? You know, more than 95% of retail grocery sales are controlled by the supermarkets. They are not going to act quickly enough to accommodate the new capacity. They're not going to add the value back onto farm. They're not going to share that value that they're generating from those sales. We need new models. We need socially just models that reflect the change that we need to see urgently over the next 5 or 10 years. We are in a climate and ecological crisis. That's very negative. I think you'll see from the presentations that we feel very positive about our capacity to affect change, but we really do need to make that change happen. So we've got 4 businesses of different sizes, different scales, different ages, and working in very different ways, but very directly with farmers. We've got Kimberley Bell from the small food bakery in Nottingham, who have over the last 8 years developed a very localized network of supply amongst a farming group that not only deliver grains into the bakery for flour and milling, but also a whole range of other products. So Kim is going to speak about that and the relationships that she's forged there. And then we've got a much older business established in the late 70s by Randolph Hodgson, Neal's Yard Dairy, and we've got Bronwen Percival, who's chief buyer and technical manager at Neal's Yard Dairy, to talk a bit about how they develop relationships with farms and how those relationships have changed the way that the farms operate and think. And then the next business that we're going to be hearing from is Unicorn Grocery in Manchester, which is a worker co-op, so it's owned by its workers, one of whom is Dan Monks, who's going to be talking about the way that over the last 22, 23 years, maybe 25 years now, Unicorn has worked with local producers and developed really quite a close set of relationships with producers around Manchester, but has also, using its surplus, enabled some of those businesses to develop. And that's a really exciting model, and one which I think personally that there's a huge scope for replication, and I know it's something that Unicorn have looked at, and it'd be really interesting to hear a bit more about that journey. And then the final speaker we're going to hear from is Joe Fennerty, and Joe founded Food Circle York a couple of years ago. This is the youngest enterprise. It's more than a couple of years ago, Joe. And that works with a network of local producers, facilitating and enabling an increase in organic and agroecological production in and around York. And that's mainly happening through markets. And that's a very different model to everyone else who will be speaking today. So, Kim, I am going to mute myself in a minute and ask you to reveal yourself, switch on your camera and switch on your microphone. If people have questions, just to reiterate, some people have joined late, please use the Q&A for any questions. We'll answer questions collectively at the end of the session. We should have 20-25 minutes at the end. If you want to just join in a conversation, please do that in the chat. And Ellen, who is the ORC FC volunteer, and I will try and address some of those, but use that for networking and conversation. Okay, Kimberley, let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Josiah. I'll get straight to it. Small Food Bakery is a very small scale but semi-industrial food production kitchen. We make bread and pastry and pies and preserves, and also fermented foods and drinks. But we're also a grocery store, and we sell all of the ingredients that we use in the kitchen, and other complementary products that are produced by the same growers that are within our network. We trade directly with growers, and we also trade directly with our customers, selling all of our produce and grocery directly from the kitchen space where we make things. We open 3 days a week. It's my belief that we need to stop validating the common misnomer in our current food regime that we need to feed the growing global population, and that we should start focusing on the more realistic and useful challenge of truly nourishing the people around us. Begin with ourselves, extend that to our family, friends, and wider community, whoever that may be, where you are, and cap it with the caveat, this is important, that in doing this work, we must not impede the work of anyone else anywhere in the world to be able to uphold their right to do the same thing. When you change the word feed for the word nourish and add the responsibility to butt out of other people's cultures, we begin a fairly major narrative shift, and the complexity of the challenge begins to reveal itself. I started the bakery 8 years ago, motivated by politics, but also very motivated by my own appetite. I've been a cook and a baker all of my life, but up until that point had not taken it particularly seriously as a career. Despite loving the processes and feeling comfortable being in the role of feeder in my community, I think it's worth highlighting that outside of the awful celebrity and elitist restaurant culture in the UK, working as a cook, chef, front of house or baker is not commonly respected as a meaningful career. It's often perceived as low-skilled work, possibly temporary stopgap for young people who then move on to better things. This is a huge failing of our culture. I've also, at that point of beginning the bakery, come to the realization that the only food available for me to buy in the city where I live, which is Nottingham, was tasteless. No wonder people don't like to eat vegetables. They don't taste of anything when procured through our prevailing food system. Working directly with the amazing organic and biodynamic farmers that I've had the privilege of working with over the last 8 years, and therefore having access to the very best produce at its freshest peak, I've now experienced very tangibly what we were missing in terms of joy at the table, flavour, connection, learning, relationships, and the strength and community that that all brings. And for me, there's no going back. Having had a bit of experience in business prior to starting the bakery, I realised from the outset that a different model was required if my ideals were to be upheld in a self-sustaining business. I should clarify that Small Food is a limited company and has received no grant funding or subsidy of any kind other than my own initial investment. So my ambition was to try to prove, possibly foolishly, that it could stand up even in a trading environment that was built around an entirely different set of values. So I haven't got much time, but I'm just going to run through a few key features of the way that Small Food is set up and has traded over that time, which I think are really critical to doing things differently or changing the narrative in our food regime. The first thing might be obvious, transparency. But what I mean by that is a real show of transparency, not blockchain or any of that bullshit, just simply an open plan kitchen where all the production is visible at all times to all of the customers. We retail and therefore display all of our ingredients, which are complex enough to be considered an entire food system: flour, eggs, dairy, oil, nuts, seeds, beans, peas, sugars, and all sorts of other things. And importantly, our customers get to see our labours actually as they happen. So they have a renewed respect for what we do and the work that goes into it. The next feature I think that's important to mention is promoting diversity at every level. This is something I've learned from spending time on farms and in particular agroecological farming systems. But translated into food production and retail, it means promoting diversity in the workers' roles and possibly the workers themselves and in terms of the experiences that they maybe bring into the kitchen. At Small Food, we rotate roles, the advantages of that. That means that somebody could be a baker one day and then they could be working on the till the next day, and then they may be cleaning, and then they may be making sauerkraut or pickles or jams. The benefits of this is it removes risk from the business. Quite simply, there's a very real problem with doing manual work, and if you want to return to small scale production, manual work is something that needs addressing. repetitive strain injuries. It also builds common sense within a team. Having people rotate around roles and do each other's roles builds empathy towards colleagues and therefore increases the support in the environment. It removes hierarchy, leading to more autonomy, resilience, and a diverse input of ideas. It encourages everybody to step up and suggest solutions to the many problems that we try to overcome when building a food system around local, seasonal, changeable ingredients. We have a more dynamic and ever-evolving team. It trains people in coping with change and uncertainty. This is also very important when dealing with local ingredients from farm direct sources that change with the seasons and with the years. It builds a stronger team that can cope with absence, cross-training new people and training visitors, which I'll explain later why it's important. Another feature is that our product design is led by ingredients and completely flexible and open to change. Most food factories design a product based on perceived market demand, and then they go to the marketplace to find component parts, usually at the cheapest price or looking for commodities. We do things the opposite way around. We build our product range around what ingredients we can get directly from the farmers we know and have a relationship with. This ensures we learn about parameters of farming through the course of our work and can make appropriate decisions to fall in line with the more natural outputs of the land and the agriculture around us. It also creates long-term, very valuable feedback loops that help build useful foodways for the future. It forces also our bakers and cooks to accept and expect uncertainty and upskill accordingly, skills for life, well prepared for the future. Another feature of our business is that we always sought to promote lateral growth. Small food is exactly that. It's never intended to grow beyond the extent of the relationships that anyone within the business can successfully manage. And that begins with me. So that's self-limiting in terms of the size of team and the size of the network around it. So all of the energy and resources normally used to facilitate growth within a business, we've used to push outwards and help others build their own empowered foodways. Another aspect of small food, which I think makes it different from the prevailing food system, is that we attempt to change the cultural narrative within the team and within the business, using many different small but significant tools. One of the cultures within our bakery is that when things don't work, we accept that it's part of the journey. Products don't need to be perfect. We learn to repair, reuse, and constantly improve knowledge and skills through making mistakes and then learning from them. Other things include kind of functions of the business, like pay is never used as a reward nor a measure of success, but it's discussed in the context of a team as a whole, and everybody is paid the same. We try to build a culture that encourages us to look after our bodies, good meals, breaks, limiting baseline rotas to 36 hours a week and a 4-day working week. And any of you who've worked in hospitality industry know that this is uncommon. It might sound obvious. Building a social or familial culture around the team, eating together when possible, taking time out to visit farms and expand our education, understand where we fit into the wider system and our wider agriculture. Embed the need to learn to teach within the business. This is really essential for future lateral growth. So we constantly welcome visitors into our space, and I encourage everybody in the team to take turns in teaching them and guiding them through their visit. All of the business modelling and all financial reporting should be shared regularly with everyone in the business so that they have an understanding of where they fit and how the wider system is evolving. The last thing I'll just mention in the context of changing the narrative within the business is just in marketing and in the way that you face the customers, be careful with the language that you use, which can reinforce dangerous extrinsic values. I do respect everyone's right to opt in or out of our foods and medicines, but I always try to avoid using or reinforcing labels like gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, which I've come to believe to be reductive or unhelpful in changing the narrative. That might be a bit more contentious, but there are other seemingly innocuous examples too that might be surprising. Like saying something is the best, for example. Have a think about that. How does that fit with valuing acceptance and diversity? So moving on, what are the outcomes of 8 years now of small food bakery? I'm often challenged to answer as to how a small enterprise can actually make a difference. So I wanted to make a list. We've done 1 million turnover to date. Approximately 85% of that turnover remained in the local economy. We've demonstrated that a successful bakery making very high quality products using wheat and rye, all grown on local organic farms, and taking what comes rather than demanding fixed wheat metrics for milling and bread making, can be successful. Lots of folks would say this is not possible. We've had now 5 years working directly with miller Paul Wyman and farmer John Turner to diversify the seeds used on John's farm and therefore the flours available to bakers in Nottinghamshire. Costed, demonstrated, tried and tested a model that works for localised grain. We've inspired and supported 3 new enterprises in the city, working with the same mission and collaborating to build this local grain economy and other local food infrastructure. Created a barter economy for fruit and veg, which over the 8 years has equaled £10,000 in value. I know that's small fry, but I'm really excited about the potential for this. And when you live in a place with no market gardens or commercial horticulture, reaching 10K in barter trade is a major milestone using the knowledge and wisdom of our amazing organic gardeners here in the city. Don't underestimate the power of small steps. We have 8 colleagues working for 2 years or more within the bakery, and they've all received bakery training using local ingredients and education around agroecology. We've taken a group of customers on a journey to change the narrative. And of course, I think importantly for me, I've provided myself with an education, and I hope I will use that wisely in the future. We've established the UK Grain Lab, which is a not formally organised network and conference of people who are passionate about local and regional grain economies. This has led to many good things, too much to mention here, but possibly most significantly, some work to challenge the very restrictive seed laws in the UK. Please check out the UK Grain Lab website if you're interested for more information. And we've established Nottingham Mill Co-op in the last year, the first cooperatively owned and run small-scale modern urban flour mill in the UK. So to conclude, I think one of my dreams or passions is I'd like to see the mobilisation of an army of small producers working in this way or similarly. I think there are some opportunities right now, right here. There's an exodus of workers leaving the hospitality industry post-COVID after many years of feeling probably undervalued. Perhaps the pandemic has put the nail in the coffin for many. But they've got the skills for building conviviality and holding space for containment and cultural change making. They are looking for meaning and purpose and to be respected and valued. Let's build the infrastructure and put support systems in place to bring them and their skills back to the heart of our community, doing the right kind of work. We need to find a way for many small autonomous food businesses to begin and thrive in the long term. We urgently, desperately, longingly need them. There is already a reframing of our communities outside of cities with the opportunities for food business to thrive in suburbs. High streets are coming back to life. We need to stop the fast food chains from moving in, protect low rents and band together to support the birth of more bakeries and more customer-facing food production businesses. Cities are changing too. There are a lot of empty properties in Nottingham city centre. Is this an opportunity to rebalance rents, bring some life back to these monocultural spaces? Despite our best efforts, our city is still mainly made up of fast food, mini supermarkets, bars and betting shops. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could place food production back in the heart of the city and make it visible? Mills, dairies, broth and noodle shops, bakeries, charcuterie, butchers, greengrocery, maybe even a sacred space for the slaughter of animals. We need to build covered markets with entry-level rental units. Can we offer rent and rate relief for food production businesses that use local produce? Can the council support infrastructure that helps people access these facilities conveniently? We need to provide the educational and mentoring frameworks to enable the leaders of these businesses to be confident, to imagine and design them and run them very, very differently from the prevailing food regime. How about a college for agroecological food production and retail? I could talk about this all day, all week, all year. It's really complex and nuanced and beautiful and hopeful and terrifying and delicious. But to offer a conclusion, if there is one, we urgently need to change the narrative in our wider culture in order to support the movement, the very positive movement towards agroecology on farms. And I believe that a diversity of small-scale, empowered, autonomous food production and retail businesses are a key component in meeting that challenge. We've got to show people, not tell people. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kim. That was really, really inspiring. And I've made a few notes and some things that perhaps will come up in the discussion. I really like the idea of scaling out, not scaling up. We don't need to get bigger. We need to inspire and enable others to do the same thing. I love the gift economy and the convivial economics of small food and the way that there are different ways that we can interact with our customers as food producers. I love the idea of small food kind of liberating our imaginations and thinking about what's possible for change, the idea of rate relief or covered markets, and thinking really differently about our city centres and urban and suburban spaces. The idea about diversity and respect, which is so critical in everything that we do, from field all the way through to our relationships with each other in food and food businesses. And then the big one, which always comes up, and I'm sure will come up in the discussion: how do we affect a narrative shift that's going to change the culture within which we exist and take down some of those barriers that limit action and change? I think that's so important. Brilliant, thank you. So next up, we've got Bronwen Percival from Neil's Yard Dairy, a much longer established business and a different model and approach. So Bronwen, if you're able and ready to share your screen, it'd be lovely to hear from you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Josiah, and thank you, Kimberley. That was really amazing. Can people hear me? I just want to check because I don't seem to be coming up on the screen. Can people hear me? Okay, you can hear me. Perfect. In that case, I'll just jump right in. Yeah, that was quite an impressive act to follow, and I'm really inspired by the work that Kimberley is doing at Small Food Bakery. So let me tell you a little bit about Neil's Yard Dairy. It's some of you may be familiar with it. It's a retailer, wholesaler, and exporter of artisan and farmhouse cheeses from the UK and Ireland, founded in 1979. And I've worked at Neil's Yard Dairy for 16 years, 15 of those managing the buying and the relationships with our suppliers who make the cheese, and the last 10 years developing a sort of more technical role in a sort of free-form way, recognizing that we need a better technical network and more support for producers to make better cheese. And so mobilizing collaboration with microbiologists, regulators, academics, essentially to try to get a better support structure in place for our suppliers and also for the cheese industry in general. And I think it's worth just dwelling briefly on how Neil's Yard Dairy is operating in a way that's different to some of these more conventional wholesaler distributor models. I think a lot of this was baked into its DNA by Randolph Hodgson, who took over the business a year in and who really was the visionary behind imagining a different way of doing business that creates a virtuous circle, essentially. I think he quite quickly recognized that the problem with the cheese industry in the UK was that he was working with a lot of producers and suppliers of cheese to Neil's Yard Dairy who were very, very eager to sell more to us because every other one of their customers, largely supermarkets, were pressuring them to change in ways that weren't ultimately good for them or the product itself. Selling through commodity supply chains meant that they were under immense pressure in terms of achieving the lowest possible price, of making their cheese consistent in ways that suited a packing line and suited, backpacking. If a cheese was too crumbly, it could be an intrinsic part of its character, but it wasn't acceptable if it didn't go successfully down the packing line or there was too much wastage there. And really that model for selling was meaning that the cheeses that were succeeding were the ones that were the cheapest and that had the prettiest labels on the outside, but not necessarily the ones that had the best flavor or supported businesses that were laudable. And so his great realization was that the retailer Neil Shared Dairy or others had an incredibly important role to play in terms of meeting the consumer and presenting these cheeses in a way that allowed the consumer to choose on things other than price and packaging, i.e. basically the flavor. So tasting every cheese at the point of sale in our shops, and then also building in things structurally that meant that we were playing fair with those suppliers as well. So never pushing back on based on price, but actually also developing a pricing structure where the price to the consumer of all the cheeses was a direct reflection of their cost to us. So working with a flat margin that meant that one cheese was never subsidizing another meant that in a perfect world, we could be generating a sort of Darwinian slate where the cheeses were succeeding based on their flavor and deliciousness rather than all of these other forces that were operating in the larger market as a whole. And I think the great success of Neil Shared Dairy, and I can't take any credit for this myself, is that essentially it's helped the industry rethink what good artisan cheese is and what cheese retail might look like. And I think as a result of that, and that virtuous circle that improves the cheese, rewards the farmer, and grows our sales at the same time, has meant that there have been many, many new entrants into cheese making and over that time. And it's I think in many ways it's been a business whose practices have ultimately set up a structure from which good things come. Certainly there have been bumps along the way. And, I think we've experimented with going down several routes in several occasions that haven't turned out necessarily as we expected them to. I think the biggest example for this, of this for me is exclusivity. Almost all of the cheeses that we sell are produced by farmers who are also able to sell them to other wholesalers. And for a while, there was the thought, we're putting in a huge amount of cheese. We're putting in a lot of effort to develop these cheeses to help people make better cheese, to support them, et cetera. And then maybe our competitors step in and buy that cheese as well. And then they can undercut us because they don't have the costs associated with doing all that development and support. They just swoop in at the last minute when everything is done and undercut us. And so was the answer to this maybe to develop more exclusive relationships with suppliers where we would essentially take all of the cheese from them? And I have to say, with hindsight, having tried that with essentially a couple of different producers, the downsides vastly outweighed the upsides for us, and I think ultimately for the producers, but in many ways more for us. That elasticity of supply and demand is a very important thing, and that committing to take all of someone's product often puts undue stress on the relationship between the buyer and the seller. And I think we've seen illustrations of that in many other places. So I just putting it out all on the table. I think there have been missteps along the way, and we've learned from them. But I think along the way there have been a lot of sort of impacts that I feel like have worked really well, and maybe are a template that other industries could be interested in learning from. I think a big one, and one that's sort of fundamental, is the role of the retailer in educating consumers. And that comes from everything from setting up a system that allows them to see and taste for themselves the difference between what you're selling and what they might have tried before, and explaining why it's different and how it's different. A great example of this is that many of the sort of cloth bound cheddars, for example, that we sell often have streaks of blue mold in them. And, even now when those cheeses go down a supermarket cutting line, if there's even a speck of blue mold, like a blue vein in a cheddar cheese, it gets kicked off the cutting line, backpacked in massive sort of ugly blocks of all these cut pieces of cheese, crammed together in a backpack, and then automatically returned to the supplier for full credit. And it's terribly disrespectful of the cheese, disrespectful of the supplier, and not really compatible with the style product that a farmhouse cheese is. yes, you can make a cheese with no blue in it by backpacking it, but actually or by backpacking it during its maturation. But the flip side is that when cheeses are matured in contact with air, they have immense ability to lose moisture, intensify in flavor, and so on and so forth. And in many cases, those blue mold veins, if they're bright and clean, taste amazing. And so, our role of educating customers, both across our counter, but also like putting pictures on our website of like, here is Montgomery's cheddar, and then having the picture of like a beautiful cheddar with some blue mold in it. And also when some of that veining and bruising is not so nice in those cheeses, which is unavoidable from time to time, playing a role where we find productive solutions with the suppliers. So instead of just returning it to them, we've developed a market through wholesale for graded cheese for restaurants. And so we actually now spend many hours a week cutting up the things that aren't good enough to sell as first quality cheese, extracting what we can, and grading it, and then buying it back from the producer at a lower price. So it's sort of everybody wins, but educating the customers specifically about, that these products are different and they deserve, they can be respected and actually prized for that difference. They need to be, if we're going to succeed, if the industry is going to succeed, is I think something that is really fundamental to this style of business. And I think, along the way, by providing a route to market, there's a role in incubating new producers, and I think also establishing a technical network to support them as well, and institutionalizing and sharing knowledge between them is really key. By getting out there and being, visiting producers every month to select cheese, we'll taste every cheese, we'll select the batches that we want to sell, and that gives us confidence that we're getting, the cheese that we need and the highest quality we possibly can. But I would say far more than that, our role is recognizing when people are having problems. Maybe we've seen that before at a different place. Maybe we can help them understand what the problem is, or connect them to another supplier who can sort of hold their hand and guide them towards an answer that will help them get back on track as quickly as possible. So, we haven't arrived yet where we, at any destination, not that we could even say that there's a destination to be arrived at in terms of wholesaler, distributor, nirvana. But I think if I were to make a wish list of what I'd like to see in the future, I think a big one of these is more routes for these cheeses to market, because even these fairly small cheese producers, by and large, are also selling to large multiples where their products are not always treated with the respect that they need, or given the price that they need. And the more routes that we have, the more good cheese shops, and I don't just mean Neal's Yard Dairy, but any good cheese shop that's able to participate in this ecosystem, buying and selling these cheeses, would be great for everybody, the suppliers, and for Neal's Yard Dairy, and for customers. So we need more good routes to market. We need an even better technical support network. Of course, I would say that, but something that takes perhaps the responsibility away from the wholesaler. It's very unconventional that a wholesaler would be performing the role of technical support. And in some ways that creates issues. What if we suggest that a supplier of ours does something that doesn't ultimately end up working? That creates a very tricky environment when you're then, or a situation when you're then also the person who's turning around and deciding to buy or not buy that product at the end of the day. So a more widely developed, a better developed technical support network that doesn't rely on wholesalers to play that role, I think is very, very important. Models for productive risk sharing between wholesalers and retailers. What could that look like? I think there's a lot of risk when you're making food on a small scale, and particularly if you're doing something different or complicated. And the more we can share that risk, the lower the risk to these small businesses, but the more it will encourage other people to get in and participate, and the more vitality it will add to the entire scene. So what do those risk sharing models look like? I think that's something we're just beginning to explore. And then finally, I think fundamentally we need more lane definition within our marketplace in terms of a price difference when those products meet the consumer between the smallest scale and most environmentally sustainable cheeses and their more industrially produced and sort of intensively produced counterparts. Right now, the market is failing to reward the people who are doing things with ultimate integrity. And as long as making those good choices is consigned to the realm of the romantics who are doing it for love rather than because it makes business sense, the harder it is going to be to grow those sort of practices as a proportion of the total market. So I think I probably talked long enough at this point, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that ensues. Thanks.
Thanks, Bronwen. That was brilliant. So much there. I've got a really messy page of notes. But I think for me, the key things coming out of that was this idea about collaboration and framing competition differently, I think is really critical. Should we see other small businesses, and although you're big perhaps compared to us, you're still a small business within the context of cheese production and dairy in the UK. Should we see other similar businesses as competition, or are there opportunities for collaboration there? And the idea about openness, knowledge exchange, how a wholesaler like you can act as an enabler and facilitate change on farm through education and encouraging consumers to see that food in a slightly different way, and working very flexibly with producers in order to enable them to ensure that they make a sale. So if something doesn't fit a specification, you don't just outright reject it, you work with them to find a way. We find that so much when we're working with grains and pulses. And we have the similar problem as well, where we're offering agronomy as well as buying the crop, and sometimes we're the only buyer for that crop. And that feels very risky for us, and we'd like to share that risk with others too. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot to talk about later. I'm going to introduce Dan Monks from Unicorn Grocery next, and to hear a little bit about their business model and how they work and how they engage with producers. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Dan. I'm one of the veg buyers at Unicorn Grocery in Manchester. Unicorn is an independent supermarket. We were founded in 1996. We had our 25th birthday just this summer gone. There are currently 69 of us, member directors, and a pool of approximately 10 casuals. We're predominantly a whole food shop, emphatically not a health food shop, although many people don't really see a distinction. Our focus is on fresh, quality, wholesome produce. And our model, where possible, is based on buying direct from suppliers, often in bulk, with the aim of minimal handling, although that's not always achieved. We have quite a large premises in Chorlton, which is a suburb of Manchester. About 40% of this is shop floor space, and the remaining 60% is a large warehouse and storage area, which allows us to buy in sort of bigger quantities. So yeah, our sourcing is based on quite strict nutritional and ethical guidelines, which, far from being restrictive, is actually really reassuring. I certainly find it helpful. There's very few grey areas in what we will buy and won't. And our pricing aims to be as competitive as possible with the multiple supermarkets. So we price check on a weekly basis. We check all of the big multiples, and we make sure that our offer is in line with those. And I think most importantly of all, we try to be a very welcoming and friendly, accessible place. We want people to feel excited that they've chosen to shop with us, certainly never judged or intimidated by the environment. So we're a worker co-op, which simply means we're governed and owned by the people that work there. We have no board, no bosses, no managers at all. Each of us has an equal say in large decisions regarding the business. We all have an equal share in the business, and we're all paid the same hourly wage. All decisions that we make, certainly never based on short-term profits. We are thinking about longevity. In fact, one of the nicest things that I've come to understand is that we're custodians of the business, and the idea is to keep it in very good tact. We're financially very prudent with a lot of our decisions, and the hope, certainly mine, is that Unicorn will outlive us all. And we believe generally that worker co-ops do offer a better vision of employment than conventionally run businesses. Certainly from my experience, I feel more motivated and passionate about my work. And we're driven by shared values, which I think is quite important and also relatively rare in a workplace. And as Kimberley mentioned as well, multitasking. We get to work across lots of different areas of the business. My job is quite unique in that I specialise in veg buying, but mostly people work across several departments. So, you know, you can be scrutinising financial reports in the morning and, you know, cleaning the loos in the afternoon, but it's very different, I think, to the alienation that lots of people experience, certainly in these sort of what are deemed lower skilled jobs in these sorts of sectors. But not only are worker co-ops of great benefit to us, the workers, but they're also great for our suppliers and our customers too. The model is one of inherently sort of its redistribution is at its heart. So I guess if this thing of rather scaling up but scaling out is something that we absolutely live by. And yeah, something that I think lots of other people can adopt in their models. So organic fruit and veg is at the heart of what we do, certainly from my point of view. And more than that, supporting the organic sector in the UK and organic agriculture is really fundamental to what we're trying to achieve every day. We have some really brilliant, meaningful, long-term relationships with our suppliers. You know, we want to support them. We want to hear what's going on. We want to know about the issues that they're facing. It's a really risky business growing, and a lot of our farmers are working out of passion more than anything else. I mean, barely any of them probably takes the minimum wage if you work it out per hour. And we also want to help them increase their output and build resilience into their operations. So we work very closely with several market gardens in Manchester. We're very fortunate to have quite a few local growers, but also several of those have developed and grown out of unicorn as well. So particularly one, our closest market garden, Gliessman, was started by a former unicorner and has grown. It's only a 1 acre site, but it's responsible for nearly all of our salad production. We get fresh salad leaves delivered 3 times a week and it's about a mile away from the shop. So yeah, our offer is really focused on what we can get locally first and foremost. And of course, seasonally, sort of goes without saying. We follow a European-wide season, with the exception of tropical fruits, of course. So we follow the produce north, and if something is available to buy in the UK, we'll purchase that above a supply that we would import. So buying direct from the farm gate is really, has always been kind of crucial to what we're doing. You know, this relationship with farmers, speaking directly to them, and also cutting out the middleman has benefit for them, it has benefit for us. We pay our invoices extremely promptly, and I think more than any other reason, this is why our suppliers value us and are very loyal. We also crop plan with about 5 or 6 of our local growers, so we meet once a year to discuss what we can take from them at what time of the year, so make sure we don't have supplies overlapping from different people, which I think can be very reassuring for the growers because they know that they've got a market there to take the produce. They're not growing in a speculative way. And it's also great at identifying gaps. So what could be grown closer to home that currently we're bringing in from further afield. So we've got a few really tremendous success stories in recent years. We had one of our glasshouse growers in Ormskirk, Lincroft Farm, trialled ratatouille for us a few years ago. So we now have an amazing supply of aubergines and peppers that runs most of the summer long. And previously we were bringing them in from Holland. And similarly, Farm Start, which is an initiative by the Kindling Trust. I think probably some of you will be familiar with it. And they were growing celery for us. So they have started to grow celery for us. And even just last year, we were importing celery at that time from Spain. And then to have something that comes from a mile or 2 away feels like, yeah, tremendous progress, I guess. So we're trying to really masquerade as a viable alternative to supermarkets. We're specifically not a luxury shop. We don't want to attract a luxury kind of wealthy clientele. We want to be for everybody. And part of that is trying to demystify the world of organics and access to organic food. And the biggest thing, or the biggest obstacle that most people face, I think, is one of price. So we have a huge emphasis on affordability. And yes, as I said, we do price checks with supermarkets, and quite often we will squeeze our margins on staple lines because we want these basic ingredients to be in line with what you can get elsewhere. So things like onions and potatoes, apples, we're constantly looking at the prices in supermarkets, and yeah, we won't be beaten, basically. And we also care very much about minimal packaging. So all of our fruit and veg is sold loose, with the exception of a few salads, but it's a case of the best packaging is none at all, and yeah, use as little as we possibly can. So growing the market, we're just a single shop, and we don't really have any plans to be anymore. With the structure as a worker co-op, it would be very difficult to replicate the model at a bigger scale, and there isn't much appetite amongst us for growth for growth's sake. I think this will probably come up quite a lot in this discussion, but in what we want is the model to be replicated. We're not looking to open a second or a third shop, but we do sell a huge amount of stuff, given that we are just a single shop floor space. We can sell upwards of 2 tons of carrots in a week. Yeah, about similar number of apples and carrots, similar about 1,000 cauliflowers I think we sold in this last week. So it's quite impressive numbers for one small shop. And our marketing and talking to customers is really integral to how we've kind of grown this market. We have an education and marketing department, and they're one and the same, or we view them as one and the same. So it's about bringing people along. We're always aimed to be upbeat, inclusive, very gentle and low key. We want to be informative. We assume, or I think it's safe to assume, little to no knowledge of the growing process. So we talk a lot about the experience of the growers in the field. We try to be very casual, friendly and approachable. We're never going to be fashionable or trendy, but we definitely avoid anything that's sort of deemed faddy or yeah, kind of anything that buzzes around health, we definitely avoid. And we're enthusiastic. We want people to share the passion that we have for a food system, which, yeah, sort of subverts the typical supermarket model. We celebrate all of the highlights of the growing year. We really emphasize things that are in season and good at that moment, based on the fact that they taste better and they're generally cheaper because there's a glut or an abundance of it at that time. We write a weekly veg news as well, which I write quite often, which is again talking about updates from our growers, what challenges they're facing, what they're kind of experiencing. And again, just to try and help people understand the complexities of what it means to be growing food in this way and the challenges that they face to be growing organically. And yeah, it's very well received. It's a nice way of engaging with our customers. So in terms of the future, it's difficult to say much beyond we want to continue doing what we're doing. I mean, we've always been led by these quite strict principles, foundations which are about nurturing, building a community around the shop, and linking with primary producers as much as we can. It's always been at the core since the beginning. We were so excited when Hodner Dodge joined the scene, and we love talking about them. We basically bang on about them anytime we get the chance. But yeah, from the information that we share, the environment that we're creating in store, how we pay our suppliers, the crop planning, all of these things we think are not beyond the realms of other people. A focus on ingredients above sort of health or well-being, not leaching off the planet, which I think goes without saying, and supporting our local economy. We have a 1 and 4% fund from our wage bill each year. So 5% of our wage bill, crucially not our profits, it comes out of the total of our wage bill, goes to projects, some in the UK, some further afield. Anybody that's doing something within organic agriculture or worker co-ops or any sort of like-minded organisation qualifies for these donations. And we also have a growers fund, which is linked to sales. That's 1% of our veg sales goes into a pot. And we just distribute that amongst our growers. We've built glass houses, polytunnels, storage for squash. We've funded courses for people. And we don't see this as like altruistic charity. It's much more crucial. It's about, there's no way that we can continue to build and develop if our suppliers can't come along with us. Yeah, and that's something is sort of particularly precious to my heart. We also have the fair tax mark, which we very proudly present in our shop. And so, although we're not scalable, I think there's quite a lot of frustration often kind of channeled at us that there aren't more unicorns. People want to see, you know, a unicorn in every town, I think was the last term. And we have to be quite gentle in saying that we don't think that that's going to be possible. But we do really want people to adopt the model. And we've written a guide. We've got a guide called Grow a Grocery on our website, which is a really, really in-depth, informative resource, which lays out everything about how we run our business, how we got started, or how the model of direct buying works. And that's free to access for everybody. We really want people to use this. And I think it was interesting what Josiah said about competition. I think one of the most brilliant things about being part of the cooperative movement worldwide is we don't really experience competition. We just see it as wanting to build the community and build the movement. So we have fantastic relationships with a lot of co-ops. We share a lot of knowledge. We are able to learn a lot from them, and we're trying to be as generous as we can in return. So yeah, Seth, my vision or hope for the future is that we have more independents, like small food, like us, each with their own heart and character. We don't need to all be the same. I mean, quite a few people actually really despise the branding and sort of feel of unicorn. We are deemed by a lot to be a kind of bunch of virtuous hippies, I think, which, you know, has some truth in it. Yeah, and together, I think there's enormous potential within that to make a massive impact on the food system. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Brilliant. That was fantastic. And it's such an inspiring model, and I think you kind of outed us as a supplier, and our relationship with Unicorn has just been so massively positive. You were our first big customer, and we are one of those people that says, couldn't there be a unicorn in every town? It would be so amazing. And just to highlight some of the things that you've brought up, which I think are interesting, and some of them are coming up in the questions as well. So the idea that a kind of demonstrable market, i.e. you, can inspire others to then get into production, that idea that the celery is no longer imported because you were there ready to buy celery from those growers when they were ready. The idea about demystifying what organic is and what good quality produce is, and being as friendly, as open as possible. I think there is a risk sometimes as retailers that we set up our shops and present them in such a way as they feel like they're for a certain set of people, and it can be quite intimidating if you don't feel you're part of that in-group. I think there's some really interesting stuff about business ownership and structures and how we ensure longevity, not only of the business itself that's offering valuable support, but also of the shared values that have established that business. It'd be good to come back to that. And I think the model of direct supply and how those trading relationships work and how you crop plan is really, really important as well. So there's some questions at the end, so I'll leave it for now, but thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
So next up, and our final speaker, is Jo Fennerty from Food Circle York, who I know has been busy this morning with veg and various other things. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about what Jo has to say about his work and how that's emerged over the last few years, and also just to celebrate with Jo that he's just won a BBC Food and Farming Award, which is fantastic news and recognition for the kind of innovation that he's committed to up in York. So Jo, I'll leave it to you to share your screen and join for the presentation.
Perfect. Hello everyone. Just so that you know, the farmers might come in for their lunch because this is the only warm room on farm, so might have to move at some point. But I suppose started the business really with the idea that there was space in the industry for this kind of ethical middle person or process or whatever. I think I kind of highlighted maybe 3 main stumbling blocks. Affordability, obviously price is always an issue, being an inclusive place for your community, everyone in the community. Logistics, the infrastructure, getting product to market, and also culture. Like, did actually anyone in York want to eat what was being produced locally and seasonally, etc. So it was just naive, to be quite honest. Very simple premise: find the people who produce food that I wanted to eat, pay them the price so that they could keep doing that, to be honest, and then just find the folk who also wanted to eat it, and yeah, see where it leads. So 2017, I kind of set it up as a side project while I was working part-time as a chef. The initial focus was on organics. Basically, I thought things were a bit more black and white back in the day between organic and conventional. Thankfully, that's changed. I didn't really have much to offer. I wasn't really shifting much stuff, to be honest. All I could really give was like a hassle-free and kind of positive transaction, and like unicorn, I think that upfront payment is key for these small-scale producers. So that's what we could offer, and just start the conversation. So managed to go around, get eggs, veg, dairy. We baked a bit of bread ourselves, and a few dry store items, mainly from Stringer's oats and oil, etc. So in doing that, we were able to start a little market once a week in a kind of eco-conscious housing development in York, out the back of my battered van on a side street, which kind of worked all right. The other side of the business was weekly sessions at the local community centre, which was just a stone throw away, but in a completely different area, deprived area of York. And our remit there was very different. We were commissioned to do community meals, especially like the hunger holiday programs, cooking courses, and we stocked the pay-as-you-feel shop with kind of gleaned produce there as well. So it was it was an interesting year or so with that. Some key points coming out of that. I mean, we're as low overheads as possible, really, especially in those early months. I mean, it was pretty much nothing. It was just basically keeping a battered van on the road, really, as much as anything. I really like the market setup. For me, it kind of is best suited to that kind of seasonal changes and showing exactly what's on offer from our local producers. We don't try and hide anything. So if, you know, when the hungry gap hits, it hits, and it looks pretty pathetic sometimes. But it's a conversation that we can have with our customers, and that interaction is, I think it's a positive one in a market. People come to talk, and for me that's absolutely massive, because it does my head in, like national headlines, and you know, everything is incredibly complex. So just having an opportunity to balance the dialogue and just keep that local perspective really at the forefront is massive. And I think it's been touched upon us as well, but the importance of a price point. I don't know, I found it just bizarre, to be honest, that quite a lot of our producers were subsidizing the products that they were doing. The customers really appreciated it, but they just didn't have the confidence maybe to price it at a point which was sustainable. So, you know, for me, there was a chance as a middleman with a bit of objectivity to kind of hopefully push those prices on. So 12 months in, lessons kind of learned. The producers themselves, I think, kind of saw that, you know, we were something positive added to it. Customer base was building it, and also importantly for me, we were kind of like growing in confidence with actually what our business was about and where we could make the most impact. So we had some key developments, took up permanent residence at the community centre, We've got a shipping container, revamped the kitchen. We've got an egg packery and like a temperature controlled storage there. So overheads again kept low, but just trying to improve the infrastructure to increase our support with the producers and improve the service to our customers. We've taken on a chef called Jim, who is just absolutely key. I think with all these models, it's this kind of lean, no waste idea, which is massive. The opportunity to kind of add value to products that producers maybe aren't quite as retailable, let's say, and also just like there is a taste of food circle, because it's just showing how this local produce can be utilized, and also that idea of preserving and squirreling away, making sure that we can eat incredibly well 12 months of the year, if we have the skills. We took on a commercial growing site, which I've got no experience really of this, but it's been massive. I think just having an insight into the economics and risk involved in primary production is great in terms of coordinating growing efforts, like Unicorn mentioned. That's kind of key, and also putting in joint investments in infrastructure. We got paper pot planters, the egg packery, etc., all led by producers there as well. And one of the nicest things that we've developed is the monthly producer markets. This was always something that I wanted to do, but it took about 2 years to actually get to that point, till we had that kind of customer base and that positive, vibrant kind of market, that it was actually, I felt like it might be worth for the producers to come down. They get a free spot, meal on site for free, and that kind of idea of just having that network, going beyond just being a kind of farmers market, but this is actually our community. And the other thing for the customers who, this is massive for them, it's just that kind of tangible visual demonstration of what our local food network actually looks like. So over the couple of years from there, our relationships with the producers has definitely changed, and it's different producers, definitely different things. So I'm here at Newfield Organics, which is one of Unicorn's suppliers. Their main issue was staff. How you just don't really have career veg pickers, especially on a field crop. Market gardens are quite sexy at the minute, but I can tell you, well, we've just been picking turnips out of the snow this morning, and it's not great. But that's something we could offer, that kind of manual side. Other people just wanted that relationship with the direct customer. That's really important, being able to articulate exactly what they're doing to the people who are eating their food. And other folk just wanted to be part of a networking community. So we've set up the Orchard Co-op. We're part of the Yorkshire Grain Alliance and this egg cooperative again, just because it's so clear that it's quite solitary in terms of primary production, and just being part of something wider, even if it's not in your direct field of work, I think is really invigorating, really, for producers, and something that I really would like to push on. So just to finish, I suppose, we've been going for just over 4 years, and to be quite honest, the job is looking harder now than it ever did. Definitely more questions than answers. The problems that we're facing in terms of for production to move forward, I think, is new entrants. Obviously, that's multiple reasons why that's not happening. But rather this change, as I said, not just looking at organics, but that kind of small scale, low input type of agriculture. This idea of having an access to the larger conventional farms, and doing what Hobmadod's do, and seeing if it's possible to work on a smaller scale, but direct, and having that control of your price point. Staffing, as I just mentioned, it's very, very difficult, and I think small foods have kind of led the way in terms of offering something really excellent for people and careers, which is, rather than using it as stopgaps. Land security, I think, particularly for our livestock, pasture-fed farmers, is constantly an issue, and it's how can we work with these larger estates who, unfortunately, I think misuse their powers sometimes. This idea of how to grow, which is coming up all the time, and for me, it's trying to keep away from this idea of convenience. I hate it, and I think it's one of the major stumbling blocks really in terms of the modern food system. But how can we create an offering which can reach as many people as possible? And then articulating the story, which I think Hodmedod's is one of the best companies that do that. I just find it too hard to do it, so I don't really. But it's something that I would like to improve upon. So yeah, I don't think we've really got much of a replicable model, but I'm proud of what we achieved so far, just to show that to create a kind of viable and vibrant local food network, it's entirely possible with very little investment. To be honest, it's just time and effort, and we don't have that. Grand. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Joe, and for your kind of very pragmatic and realistic take, which I'm very familiar with, of what it is that you do and how that works. And I've got, before we go to the questions, I just drawing out a few things that you were talking about. I mean, I think this theme that's going to come up is around price points, both for the consumer, but also making sure that we're paying the producer enough money. The way in which a secondary wholesaler, or what might be thought of as a middleman, a bad thing, can be a really positive thing in terms of adding value to crops and products that might otherwise have very limited value, by processing or by shared infrastructure. I love the idea of your egg packing station. The fact that your market also acts as a networking hub for your community of growers in order for them to come into contact with their customers. And then I think the big thing for me, and Kim right at the beginning was talking about how we change a narrative and how we shift a sort of culture. And I think one of the big things is a sort of physical manifestation of what it is we want to see, making it happen, putting it in our communities, wherever those communities happen to be, and demonstrating that it is possible and we can do it. So coming to the questions, if all of the panel want to unmute themselves and become visible again, we will address some of those. So there are some quite detailed, specific questions for people. I will try and get to those at the end. I'd like to try and get to some of the big ones if everyone is happy to do that. So one of the ones that I think is really interesting is about business ownership and stewardship and models. It would be interesting to hear from everyone very briefly about what their business model is in terms of ownership and structure, and whether they have succession plans or offering the longevity to the producers that they work with in order they can feel confident in that market. So it'd be great to hear from all of you very briefly about that and how you see that working. From Hodmedod's perspective, I'll just say that might as well. We're limited by shares. We've got 3 owners, which is Nick, William and myself. Our long-term plan is to move to employee ownership. But that is quite a long-term plan because we need to be able to make sure we're handing our employees a sustainable, viable business. Do you want to start, Joe?
Yep. Yeah. Sorry. I think I'm too short in the tooth for this one, to be honest. I suppose in start, I'm a social enterprise CIC, so I am a for-profit business, but I just see the kind of I see it as a viable alternative to the capitalist system. And in terms of ownership, it's just me. And to be honest, I find that quite important initially, just to have complete autonomy. I don't envisage this will always be the case, but I think in terms of having flexibility and able to respond quickly with things, that means quite a lot to me to start with. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Kim?
I would just echo what Joe said. We're limited by shares and I'm the sole shareholder. And I guess that's been really important to me because we did something that no one had done before. So it took both dynamic vision, and what Joe said is that you need to be able to make decisions really, really quickly, and to be a confident leader, possibly, a bit sort of bullish in that, but also there's a huge amount of risk, as you say, about hodmedod's, in what I was proposing to do. I'm not sure that I wanted to drag anyone into that at that stage. What the future holds, I'm not really sure. But I do think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the visionary, really small businesses. And if we assume that there's a place for these very small businesses, then this is possibly the right model. And it's, if you're sharing, if you want to kind of promote others to also hold autonomy in the space, for me, what's interesting is about supporting lateral growth and actually empowering others to kind of replicate what you've done and forming a network around a locality of many businesses like this. But it's just really important for me to be able to take risk on my own terms and not kind of worry about other people in those decisions.
Bronwen, as a larger and longer established business, how does it work for you?
I think the structure of Nealshire Dairy is much more conventional. It's interesting that when the business was purchased, a year in by Randolph, he was the sole owner of that business. And I think what people are saying about the freedom that gives to make big, bold decisions without worrying about having to bring people along with you is absolutely true. Today, it is owned by 6 owner directors who have varying amounts of shares in the business. And I think it's and also I think probably the other thing that they would want me to say is that they have funded the growth through bank loans rather than external investors, which probably again is important to thinking about the way that decisions are made and what is prioritized in terms of the values of the business. So yeah,
I think there is that big risk of external funding for business growth and development, and the pressures that places on the direction and the values of the business. So finally, I'm going to come to Dan, because it's obviously a radically different model. But my feeling, I was kind of new unicorn right from the beginning, right from the early years, and you had some very charismatic people involved in the startup that really inspired Unicorn's establishment.
Yeah, some real characters. I don't actually know that much about, there's lots of kind of policy and things that kind of go beyond my head. I mean, in terms of how we maintain our structure, I mentioned being financially prudent. We always keep very large cash reserves at all times to ensure that we can pay ourselves and our suppliers and survive a kind of tumultuous year or two. We also now own our premises as well, which means we're relatively secure. But yeah, it's a worker co-op, and as soon as you leave, you lose all power and rights and say and shares.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting contrast, isn't it? So we've got limited by shares, a community interest company with an asset lock, and then the co-op, which obviously comes with an asset lock by its very nature. I think the other question that's coming up a fair bit is around agricultural labour, which I think is really interesting. And Joe, you touched on the problem with securing field workers, but also there's a question about, for you, Dan, really about how some of the growers are using volunteer labour in Manchester, and how does that fit into the model? And I think there are, it is really challenging, particularly with those sort of high effort, high labour input crops like field vegetables. Be good to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, certainly the market gardens that most closely supply us, Gliessman and Libby Flintoff, they pay themselves. I think Farm Start is seen as a training scheme, so you actually pay to be a part of it rather than taking a wage. I don't know how fair that seems after a 12-hour shift in the either blazing sunshine or weather like it is today. I mean, labour generally has been the biggest complaint that we've heard from pretty much all of our growers, trying to get a reliable source, particularly since Brexit. It has been a daily headache, and we've heard of certain crops just being left in the field because people don't have access to the pickers anymore, and it's not going away. It's definitely how do we recruit for this sector? How do we get people interested in it? I had one apple grower in the summer saying he had some students. He said they're delightful, they're wonderful conversationalists. I really like being around them, but are basically useless and they don't pick at anything like the rate that I need them to. And, you know, I have to pay them well. Yeah, so it's something that will need quite urgently addressing, I think, in the next few years.
So Joe, was I right in assuming that, or hearing, or that you actually go and weigh in and you go and fill that hole if your producers need support?
Massively, yep. Because as I said, I had nothing really to offer other than myself. So like I don't come from any farming or agricultural background, but I can you know, spend a day in a field and pick some veg just about without getting too many bollockings. Like, so yeah, I think for me it's an interesting a problem to have. And I think with Food Circle as a business, this is something that we will probably look to kind of enter and have like a floating pool of workers at some point. That I think sharing the risk as we've talked about before, because I think in this way, if you have floating staff, then like at Kim's Bakery, you know, it's different challenges every day. You're not just stuck in the freezing cold for six days a week. So like, I think we're going to have to, you know, it's great that these training schemes are starting to appear, but we're starting from nothing really. And I think we're going to have to be fairly creative to be, you know, get the right folk involved, because it's kind of romanticized to a certain extent. I think most of the farms and production I go to, you know, it's just hard. It's just really, really hard. So yeah, we need to get a bit creative.
So just quickly on your labor efforts that you're putting in personally and that your team might be putting in, does that reflect some of Kim's idea about the gift economy and how we might barter or exchange? There will be non-economic relationships or non-monetary relationships that you might have with your suppliers.
Exactly. So like Newfields, I work for veg, which in the starting days was massive to be able to sell it at kind of like a wholesale rate, especially at the community centre. You know, and my thoughts on this has changed because the price point is so important that you can't just subsidize it the whole time. But I think there is so much value, and it is like the gleaning thing as well. You really struggle to communicate, especially with like supermarket waste cafes and stuff where all this is chucked on, and it's just not looked at in a fair way. They're using it as waste disposal, whereas anything coming from an organic system has intrinsic value one way or another to the system. So like gleaned produce from this farm there has to be some sort of transaction, and I think it's very hard to communicate that in the current climate.
Totally get that. Kim, you had a point on this.
It was just really, well, Joe's kind of covered it, but it's just really to say I'd love to see a future where you can just imagine for a second that we need to skill a whole army of bakers and people making food by hand. That might balance out our need to pick by hand. And I think that there's some like potential in the future to look at crossing over those roles. They could be the same people because, you know, as Dan was saying, you know, what we don't want is sort of unskilled or inexperienced people coming in for picking season. What we need is people who respect the produce. And I think that there's loads of potential in using kitchen hands to pick produce because we know how we want it to come into the kitchen, and we also know how we want it to be presented in a retail environment. So there's a lot more respect. We're also adept at using our hands and working at speed. So it'd be really nice to see a lot more cross kind of pollination. If we've got a large labour pool working in kitchens that are flexible like small food, then it is totally possible to take them away at seasonal kind of glut time, put them on a farm instead, and vice versa. When there's nothing happening on the farm, there's a lot to be done in the kitchen. So I just think kind of more diversity of role and kind of sharing of labour pools would be useful in the future.
That's a really interesting idea from both of you, that there might be this floating pool of people who therefore would not be doing the same repetitive job every day, but would have variation and diversity in their tasks and responsibilities. There's a question, will there forever be a question about this? But there's a question about Brexit, which I think possibly might affect both Bronwen and Dan. It doesn't affect us because we don't import or export anything, which turns out to be a delightfully resilient position to be in. But Bronwen, have your cheese sales been affected by this? And a kind of additional subsidiary question is, how have you supported producers who have lost those markets?
I mean, in a nutshell, Brexit has been hugely challenging for us on multiple different fronts, which is sort of an interesting element of it. It's not just about being able to trade with Europe, which in many ways, because there's a free trade agreement, at least currently, we don't pay any duty on our cheeses going into Europe, for example. But we also have been faced with an incredible load of red tape and just unimaginable complexity of customs intermediaries and declarations, where once it had just been like, put it on a truck and it goes wherever. That has cost us a lot of time and money and aggravation. And also we're importers of cheese as well, because Ireland now is a European country that we have to do all of that importation and customs work with in a way that we never did before. And that's, just the mentality wise, it feels like they're much further away than they were previously. I don't think we'd so much differentiated between cheeses bought in from Ireland and ones bought in from, the north of England or anywhere, locally to us. They were part of our local network. And now we're having to treat them as a foreign supplier, it's difficult. And I don't think we've seen the last of that. Interestingly, I don't think that there's been that much dampening of demand in Europe for our cheeses. They have got more expensive as a result of the costs of, all of the customs paperwork and so forth. But I think they're more insidious issues that is presented. One, provision of labor, particularly on farms and in our own team, where, there are not that many people out there who want to put cheese in boxes or milk cows. And that is a big stress on the industry. And the other one that I think is, again, maybe something that I think a lot about is there's a lot of technical acumen and knowledge in Europe, particularly around cheese, that we don't have here. And being able to work and bring over consultants and suppliers of that information and allow them to do that work without, again, having to deal with enormous red tape is a big issue for us. So that's the headlines.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the challenge is really that we have a lot of collaboration that goes on in Europe, and we're involved in a lot of scientific research projects across Europe through Horizon 2020. A lot of that is disappearing, and although we're obviously still engaged with those people, it's much harder than it used to be. The other thing that we're finding difficult is accessing seed. A lot of the crops we want to grow are not grown in the UK, so we have to look elsewhere for seed, and that's becoming more difficult. Dan, at Unicorn, obviously you are buying in. One of the questions that was asked is what percentage is imported and what percentage is UK? And I think perhaps a subsidiary question, I might sound like a kind of Brexiteer, Tory backbencher here, but might Brexit press us to think about relocalizing supply a little bit more, and might it make us address some of these questions around employment and recruitment and things?
Well, certainly that's the hope, isn't it? And that's the kind of optimistic point that we always try to return to. We import as little as possible, but the reality is that as we approach the Hungary gap, that gets to about 70%. There is a period of about 2 months in the year where there is just hardly anything available in the UK. It's all stored veg, and there's a demand still for things like aubergines, and of course citrus is the one I always return to as an example. We're never going to see a UK grown orange or lemon. Brexit, very briefly, it's affected us enormously in terms of headache and cost, but then also it sort of hasn't changed anything at all. Like, we're still working with these same suppliers that have been trading with us for 20 years. It's an ongoing headache, and it looks to be getting even worse because of the status of organics, which is going to come in July of this year. The sort of point of hope that we all come back to is that hopefully people will start to utilise more land in the UK, and more stuff will be grown on this soil. That Holland is the example, which is the most similar in climate to the UK. We could massively ramp up glasshouse production, for example, like they have done. Hope we do.
So we've got a couple of minutes left, and there's one more big question really, which we probably won't have a chance. I'm going to ask everyone just to chip in on this one, which is, I think Ben Reynolds is asking the chat about unicorns grow a grocery, and the idea that we've all talked about replication and how we might facilitate that replication process. You know, whether we could offer courses or training. Do any of you do that? What are your plans and thoughts on that? How do we replicate? How do we facilitate that replication? Should we? Do you have some specifics on that, Kim? You've looked at this a lot.
Well, I think about this all the time, as you know, and it's a big question for me now going forward. I think I was naive in thinking I could affect more change more quickly in that regard, and I wanted to see, you know, more lateral growth in Nottingham in particular. So far, what we've been successful at Small Food is welcoming others to intern with us at a professional level, and I learned quite quickly to be selective about who I would accept for internship. You know, just basically making provision within my business and my own personal time and resources to try to support others who I felt had internalized within themselves the need to do something differently, and I would invest in that. So that's kind of how I've done it, and I think I've sort of managed to support a few people in stepping out and doing their own thing, but very, very informally. And I guess the temptation is always to think how to formalize that, how to affect more change, how to have a bigger impact. I don't know if that's necessary at this stage, and that's kind of something I'm thinking about, whether it will just happen and whether it should happen organically in order to remain kind of effective, or whether there should be some formal training kind of scheme put in place to teach the methods of small food. So yeah, I don't know, maybe watch this space, I guess, is the answer.
And on that note, we have completely run out of time. As I suspected when we talked beforehand, we could have gone on for another hour. I think there's so much to explore here about narrative and structure and cultural change and shift and the economics of these models. But thank you so much, panel, for your contributions today. It's been really, really inspiring and interesting. Such a diversity of businesses and approaches, all working towards the same common goal. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks.